Dia berubah guys ya. Orang Inggris ini berubah saat dia pulang dari Malaysia. Kenapa? Kenapa bisa begitu? Mengapa dia bisa berubah? Saat balik dari Malaysia, dia tidak begini. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Halo guys, berjumpa lagi di video ini di kesempatan siang hari Jumat yang berbahagia ini. Apa kabar Anda semua di sana? Tentunya setiap hari saya selalu menyapa Anda. Setiap saya nggak mengupload video, saya selalu mendoakan semoga kita dalam keadaan baik-baik saja, sehat senantiasa jasmani juga rohaninya. Dan apapun itu pekerjaan, kegiatan, aktivitas yang kita kerjakan di dalam maupun di luar rumah, semoga juga diberikan kemudahan dan juga kelancaran oleh Tuhan Yang Maha Kuasa. Amin, amin, ya rabbal alamin. Oke, ini ada satu video menarik, unik, dan wajib ya guys. Wajib untuk kita reaksi ya. Oke, di sini ada satu pengalaman dari orang UK. Orang UK nih guys ya. Turis asal UK. Setelah 11 tahun dia di Malaysia, ya, balik kampung ke negaranya ke UK, dia merasa seperti orang asing. Ini adalah pengakuannya guys ya. Saya tak lagi seperti menjadi orang UK karena adab yang kebiasaan yang dilakukan oleh orang Malaysia tertular kepada dia dan dia tularkan juga kepada orang-orang yang ada di UK. Dan yang anehnya, padahal dia adalah orang UK, dia merasa menjadi orang asing di sana. Nah, bagaimana keseruan video ini guys ya? Tentunya membuat kita penasaran, saya dan tentunya juga Anda akan penasaran untuk menyaksikan video ini. Oke, sama-sama kita reaksi. Ini dia.
Almost a shame if you were to come to Malaysia and only see KL, only see the typical tourist place and not actually explore everything.
Meet Rhys William, a Brit who's been living in Malaysia for 11 years, running a social media agency. He shares the biggest misconceptions foreigners have about Malaysia, how life in Kuala Lumpur compares to life in London, and what's most challenging about the Malay language for foreigners. I'm Max Chernoff, your insider to Expat Life. Jom!
Saya rasa yang paling saya suka pasal Malaysia, dia punya suasana lah.
What do you say?
The thing I like most about Malaysia is the vibe, the environment. Suasana is like, I don't know, the atmosphere. The hardest part of the language for me was if am trying to practice my Malay, a lot of people see me to practice English.
Ya.
So like I set myself a challenge years ago where every Saturday I would go to the pasar, like the bazaar, right? And I would say I'm only going to speak Malay, even if it's really bad. Like I will speak Malay to people to like practice. And obviously at this place, these people are thinking, great, there's this English guy, I'm going to practice my English with him. So it was like a bit awkward because they're talking English, I'm talking Malay. They're probably thinking my English is good, why don't we just speak English? I'm thinking, no, I'm out to practice my Malay. That was the biggest challenge, actually. I think the language itself is not that difficult if you expose yourself to it.
What do you think the biggest misconceptions about Malaysia in the West, let's say?
One of the biggest misconceptions would be maybe because obviously Malaysia is a Muslim majority country.
Yeah.
I think there's a perception of, I mean, in general, the West perception towards Islam is quite, there's a certain perception there, which I think people would apply onto, so you would hear like, oh, Malaysia is a Muslim majority country, it's an Islamic country. Maybe some of their perception would be, oh, that means it's going to be, say, for example, like the Middle East or Saudi Arabia, where it's going to be very strict, you're not going to, like, there's their fear about Islam, halal, everything. I think that's maybe one misconception is people really, they need to come here and see that yes, there is that element here, but there's so much more to it than just that. So one of the biggest conceptions my dad had when I was telling him like, yeah, here's most of the food you eat, if you go out and eat at like a restaurant, it's going to be halal, right? There's that perception towards, oh, halal food, that means it's going to be like this, whereas actually it's just a misconception based on what the narrative that they've heard, whereas actually when you come here and see the real narrative, it's very different.
How would you compare KL, Kuala Lumpur and London now?
But I think the biggest difference between London and KL would be maybe the people. London, I think, has a reputation of being quite miserable. People don't really talk to each other. Like people, they come across as a bit moody, right? I think it's more of perception. But then in KL, like even from when I first came on holiday, people in general are quite friendly. People seem more cheery in the day-to-day compared to London. So I'd say that's the biggest difference I notice when I go back is like the people's sort of, I guess, energy is very different.
When you go to London like once a year, what's your feelings? Like what's the reverse culture shock?
I think for me is the way people talk is very different. So there's a lot of, even though in London itself, people are generally quite, like I said, maybe not to say miserable, but they're quite sort of flat. When you go out of London, especially more to like the villages or like my grandparents' town quite far out, where people are very friendly, the biggest culture shock for me is the sort of small talk that people make. So if you go into the shop and you're like buying your groceries, the person will ask you like, oh, how's it going? How's your day? And for me, it's a shock because not to say in Malaysia people aren't friendly, they won't talk. But there isn't just small talk like that, not that I've seen, where you just sort of talk to strangers. So it was a bit of a shock for me, like, yeah, it's fine, like, why are you asking me? And, you know, like that level of sort of like politeness and talking that was the biggest shock for me that I really noticed. Like, because you just forgot about it. I think then when you've had that for a few weeks and you come back to Malaysia, you have the opposite, where it's like, you almost want to talk to people, like when you go, you're like, hi, but people are not like, why is this guy talking to me? Which is not to say like it's right or wrong, it's just different culture, you know, different ways done differently. What are the habits you obtained living in Malaysia for 11 years? One is definitely language. So there's a lot of words. I mean, it's similar to Singapore, right? It's Singlish, right? There's a lot of like words that I guess you would say filler words like la, like all these words. Whereas in, I guess, traditional English, you don't have that, but they sort of come out. So I guess that's one habit. Like even if I'm speaking English, there'll still be these sort of words and the way you talk, mannerisms that come out. I think other habits, I mean, one is definitely shoes in the house. I think when I went back in winter last year. So I mean, winter's not that cold, but you know, you're wearing like your big boots, they're muddy. First thing when you get in the house is take them off. So I'm walking around in my socks and like everyone else has got their shoes on. And that was a bit of a, okay, because it just becomes a habit, right? You just do it when you come in. And the floor is cold also. Yes. Sometimes. That was one thing is, yeah, you forget, right? Because obviously here you don't need heating, right? Whereas there, if you don't turn the heating on, you feel it. Other habits, I think, is, an interesting one is for a knife and fork. So like the way, like here, and I mean, it's the same in Singapore as well, right? If you eat like, you have a fork and spoon, right? Not really knife and fork for like if you're eating like rice or something. So I've noticed with the way here, like if you eat with your right hand. So if you're eating with your hand, you would eat with your right hand. So if you're eating, you tend to use your right hand to
kebiasaan
put it in
cara
your mouth,
makan
right?
itu ya.
Whereas I noticed like in the UK, you use your right hand for the knife to cut and then you eat with the left hand. So for me, when I went back and like eating at a restaurant and you've got a knife and fork rather than a fork and spoon, it was quite awkward to, how do I use the knife? Because I'm so used to eating with the right hand. That surprised me a bit because I wouldn't have thought that, you know, but it just sort of like you realize, oh, okay, this is actually a bit awkward now. Because you're so used to eating a certain way. How's your, let's say, relatives living back in UK? They say that you changed when they see you after coming from Malaysia? The first time I went back, they said I changed because I put on a lot of weight. Because I was doing a lot of food content, right? So I got quite overweight. That was the first thing they said changed. The second thing was definitely the accent. So my brother, like always, like, he just laughs sometimes. There's certain words, like one is boat. So in very like British, you would say boat. But here you say boat. So like it sort of comes out, and then like they sometimes look at me and they can't keep a straight face because they're like this is my brother, you know, like I grew up with him and now he sounds funny. I think that was the biggest shock for them. Talk of Tony Fernandez yesterday. He was sent by his parents from Malaysia to boarding school in the UK. So he spent a few years there. And then they came back to the US, and then at some point he started the airline. I actually interviewed him like 10 months ago. Awesome. Yeah. I think his English accent is probably more English than mine now. I think he talks because, you know, he studied there, right? But his accent also, I would say, very generic now. Like, I guess it's a bit British, but like generic. It's got a bit of twang, right, to it, right? A little bit, yeah. But he's a great guy. I put the link for the interview in the description. It was like amazing how I actually sent him a message on the LinkedIn. Oh, okay, and he replied like awesome. In 5 minutes. I think like that's one of the things is people, they tend to think a lot of these people are quite hard to reach and far away, right? Actually, you'd be surprised how easy it is to reach out to people, right? Like you send a message and they reply. But that's awesome, right? Because you would think Tony Fernandez is like impossible, right, to reach. Yeah, exactly, yeah. And also reply in 5 minutes, right? I don't know if you noticed, like busy people tend to reply faster, right?
Yes, correct. Yeah, busy people, high-level people, I see they always like on WhatsApp, they're super fast.
Yes.
They send me a message 10 p.m. They reply like 10:05.
Yes, exactly, right? Whereas the perception would be these guys don't reply, right?
Sometimes they don't, but like you would be surprised like how sometimes they really reply. Speaking about food, I mean, you lost a lot of weight. I read this story. It's quite difficult. If I lived in Malaysia, I probably gained a lot of weight because the food is great, but it's not like only greens and you know what I mean?
There's a lot of sugar and a lot of oil and a lot of food. Partly why it tastes quite nice. I think the other challenge is it's just so easily available. I mean, it's the same in Singapore, right? Like 24/7 you can eat.
Yeah.
Whereas, I mean, in the UK, like after 6, 7, 8 p.m., that's it. You know, like you might have a pub or something with some chips, but
yeah, that's it.
But here, like 24/7, you want food, it's there. So I think the challenge is the readily available amount of food and the variety of food.
Yeah.
And you just don't get bored of it because there's always something new, something different.
Yeah.
That was the challenge for me.
How you managed?
How I managed is I had to be strict with myself. So when we used to do food content, we would spend like one day, we would shoot 3 restaurants, morning, lunch, evening, we'd be eating, and we would eat for the camera, for the content, and then we would eat afterwards, like finish the food, really enjoy it, right? That wasn't actually what made me put on weight. I think what made me put on weight was that then after the shoot, I would like stop by and get a snack on the way home. I would like drink a lot of sugary drinks, and I didn't have a balanced lifestyle. So how it actually worked for me was when I started to realize that yes, you can enjoy food, but it has to be, it's part of the equation. It's not like there's a phrase like in Malay, right? It's like you don't live to eat, you eat to live. So like your food is actually an energy source, right? So you can enjoy it. There's nothing wrong with having good food, but it's all about balance. So for me, it really started helping when I would balance it out with exercise. I would still enjoy food, but I would eat the portions a lot more reasonable rather than just stuffing as much as I could in. That was really the mindset shift, I think.
Yeah.
Rather than a diet or exercise, it was that association with food it's not like just a pleasure source to have unlimited whenever you want. That was the challenge because you're in a place where there's so much good food around.
Yeah.
It took a long time. I think I was like really taking care of my health for about 3 years, but you don't see the results until you've been consistent for a while.
Yeah.
So people see suddenly like, wow, Reese, you've lost so much weight. It's like, this journey started like 3 years ago. You're only just seeing the results now. And I think it's probably, you know, the same with content, right? People see where you are now, but they don't see the years of doing videos, putting it out there that actually pays off.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people give up because they're not willing to be consistent. So for me, for the diet and lifestyle change, that was doing that consistently for years. Then you see the benefits from it.
How your perception about Malaysia changed through these 11 years?
It's really interesting because when I first came here, obviously on my holiday, I was very much a tourist. So it was the typical tourist spots that everyone sees in Malaysia.
Yeah.
Then when I moved here, I originally went into like the expat sort of bubble, like the crowd. So it was very much like a lot of other foreigners living here. I went to a lot of these events where you'd meet other expats, and I kind of got exposed to the expat life, but I didn't really see the true Malaysia side. It was only after I'd been here for I think around 3-4 years, I started to like branch out, like make local friends. I used to go hiking a lot, really tried to mix more locally. Then my perception of Malaysia changed. Because I think before that, I'd seen the very sort of polished city, that sort of life. Then when I started, you know, going outside the city, exploring more, eating more local, spending more time with local people, that's when my perception changed there as well. Malaysia actually has so much more than meets the eye on the surface level.
Can you give me an example, like maybe something like that really memorable for you?
Okay, so I think for me, one of the most memorable things is when we first started making content, we would travel around Malaysia. So we'd go to like each of the different states.
Yeah.
And what I realized is every single state will have its own food is one. Even if the food is very similar, there'll always be a slight twist. And sometimes even to the point of every like locality will have a different twist on the recipe.
Yeah.
There'll be slight variations in the language, the dialect, even the culture in different states. So it was only when we started making content and I started going into these places and starting to see, oh, okay, actually, if you want to try and put Malaysian into one bubble of everything, is actually you can't, because every single state has its own food, culture, even language. that was when I really started to feel like, wow, there's a lot more here that meets the eye. Yeah,
I guess especially, let's say, Sabah and Sarawak.
Yes, exactly.
On Borneo, it's quite different from the mainland.
Yes, definitely. And when you go over there, you really see the I guess diversity, variety is crazy. You know, it's almost a shame if you were to come to Malaysia and only see KL, only see the typical tourist place and not actually explore everything. I think you could spend a lifetime here if you really wanted to explore everywhere.
Is there?
Dia berubah guys ya. Orang Inggris ini berubah saat dia pulang dari Malaysia. Kenapa? Kenapa bisa begitu? Mengapa dia bisa berubah? Saat balik dari Malaysia, dia tidak begini. Kebiasaan dia tidak dia lakukan seperti hal ini. Apakah ada orang-orang di Malaysia yang mempengaruhi dia sehingga membuat orang Inggris ini berubah saat dia pulang ke negara asalnya? Yap, begitulah guys ya. Perubahan itu adalah perubahan adab, yang mana adab dari negara-negara barat sana ya. Ketika dia masuk ke negara Malaysia itu berubah menjadi adab timur ya, yang mana lebih mengutamakan sopan santun, kebiasaan yang tidak sama seperti orang-orang di barat. Seperti contoh saat makan ya guys ya, yang mana di barat sana biasanya makan pakai pisau dan juga garpu ya guys. Dan kalau makan pakai garpu itu kan otomatis dia motongnya sebelah kanan, tangan kanan, makannya sebelah kiri ya guys ya. Kan memang tak boleh ya. Kalau kita makan tangan sebelah kiri itu memang tak boleh ya guys ya. Itu adalah kita makan bersama setan ya guys ya. Tak boleh. Nah, adab itu yang dirubah ketika dia masuk ke Malaysia. Bahkan pisau itu berubah menjadi sendok. Ataupun tidak pakai sendok dan garpu, tapi pakai tangan kosong saja guys. Nah, hal ini seninya ada, perbedaannya ada. Contoh, saat makan nasi kadar atau nasi lemak, itu lebih enak kalau kita makan menggunakan tangan ya guys. Nikmatnya itu pasti berbeda ya. Nah, hal ini yang dirasakan setelah 11 tahun. Bahkan dia sudah bisa berbahasa Melayu Malaysia guys. Di awal tadi kan sudah kita lihat ya, dia bahasa Melayu Malaysia. Ini membuktikannya apa guys? Bahwa dia sudah mulai bersatu, sudah mulai menyatu dengan orang-orang yang ada di Malaysia. Nah, 11 tahun dia di sana. Mengapa begitu lama? Tentu ada satu daya tarik di sana yang membuat dia tidak ingin buru-buru untuk pulang ke negaranya. Tentu keramahan lagi. Keramahan orang Malaysia ini sudah sangat terkenal bahkan sampai ke UK. Banyak orang seperti ini di Malaysia yang awalnya mungkin hanya coba-coba. Ketika saat sampai di Malaysia, kok Malaysia itu begini? Kok tidak sama seperti di UK? Ya, memang adab di negara-negara barat itu memang acuh tak acuh, cuek sama orang-orang yang tidak dikenal. Ya, bahkan ya tidak saling memperdulikan. Tapi kalau ke Malaysia, bahkan saat berpas-pasan itu bisa memberikan senyuman yang manis. Dan itu tentu tidak dilakukan oleh orang-orang di barat sana guys. Nah, hal inilah bahkan dia adalah seseorang menjadi konten kreator kuliner guys ya. Dia juga ikut turut serta mempromosikan kuliner yang ada di Malaysia. Dan hal ini tentu juga dapat menaikkan turis dan menyumbang untuk devisa negara. Karena begitu konten-konten dia dilihat sama orang-orang barat, maka mereka akan tertarik dan akan memutuskan terbang dari UK atau dari negara-negara Eropa masuk ke Malaysia. Karena apa guys? Karena dipromosikan oleh konten kreator ini guys. Dan semakin banyak mereka ada di Malaysia, semakin sering mereka mempromosikan Malaysia, maka nilai jual untuk pariwisata Malaysia itu akan jauh lebih meningkat. Dan terbukti pasca pandemi bahwa wisata Malaysia itu meningkat setiap tahunnya guys. Keren. Baiklah, demikian tadi video aku. Semoga video ini bermanfaat bagi kita semua dan aku mohon diri. Mohon maaf jika ada kesalahan kata, kesalahan sikap pada Anda semua. Mohon dimaafkan dan aku akhiri. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.